So you're going to have uncertifiable machines, you're going to have hackable machines, you're going to have secret vote counting. Do you think these elections are valid?
I have to tell you that in my opinion, you can't solve this by electing a Democrat or a Republican. Your system is rotten to the core.
It's more important, given these uncertainties, for everyone to vote. If you want to make it more difficult to tamper with things and to steal elections, then you put on an overwhelming show of force.
They don't even need to steal the election if you don't vote.
Is there evidence available to determine whether electronic voting machines are capable of accurate and secure elections? Are the election practices conducted in San Diego County and other California counties, including but not limited to sleepovers, conducted in the most secure manner possible? And further, to quote CNN's Lou Dobbs, we're talking about a disaster here. Why is any election officer in the country taking a risk with these machines? This is like playing with nitroglycerin, end quote. Google the words train wreck and votes, and you'll get over 500,000 hits. What's this all about? Some of those hits will explain how San Diego has been ground zero for the election integrity concerns. Earlier this year, a California 50 congressional district candidate was inaugurated into Congress before all the votes had been counted, leaving many people confused as to how that is possible. San Diego is also in the news because it just happens to use the same brand of controversial voting equipment that was recently featured by an esteemed Princeton study revealing the equipment as highly vulnerable to tampering. Earlier this year, our own Secretary of State's team of computer experts affirmed what election integrity advocates had been claiming about insufficient security in our computerized voting systems. But also they reported things were far worse than even the activists suspected. Sherry Healy of the California Election Protection Network responded, when our former Secretary of State learned about significant vulnerabilities to our Diebold voting machines systems, he decertified those systems. It was that simple. When our present Secretary of State learned about far worse vulnerabilities, he recertified our Diebold voting systems. Which twin has the Tony? But the next question is, what will the next Secretary of State do with this most precious constitutional process that we indulge in? Tonight you're going to hear a phenomenal band of experts, people who know what they're talking about and who've been through the mill, castigated, chastised, challenged, and all of them have never had to come up for air. Bev Harris. Is the founder of Black Box Voting, a nonpartisan, nonprofit elections watchdog group. She is credited with founding the movement to clean up electronic voting by Vanity Fair magazine. And the Boston Globe has referred to her as the godmother of the movement. Bev Harris discovered the Diebold files and set them free into the wild in 2003. She has received 3 cease and desist notices and has been interviewed by the Secret Service 5 times. If that ain't a mark of distinction, I don't know what is. Her work and others is now being featured on a new HBO special, Hacking Democracy, November 2nd. Watch it and see what they're doing. Bev Harris.
Because a little birdie has told me that the files for the other manufacturers are about to escape into the wild too. All for it. More on that later. You know, I'm here to tell you that I don't want you to wait for a group. I don't want you to wait for someone to tell you what letter to write. You as an individual can achieve amazing change. I'm one person. Lowell Finley, who will be coming out, is just one person. Bruce Funk is one person. And there are others, Tom Corbett, one person. And these people are making a big difference. There's no excuse for waiting around. We're going to tell you how rotten it is, but also we need to realize that our ancestors died for the right to vote. People came to this country for the right to vote. My husband is African American. His family has been fighting for the right to vote for 5 generations. The suffragettes in 1906 were fighting for the right to vote. They were told they were crazy. They had to have a hysterectomy because they must be nuts. They were hysterical. These people fought for our right to vote, and it's our job to take back the ability to oversee our own elections, because that's what we owe to our next generations. And to help you do that, because I think the case has been made. Oh, I'll take 1 minute to make the case one more step. After I found those files, those Diebold files, we put them on the internet on June 16th, 2003. In 48 hours, people had found 4 or 5 different ways to hack the system. I published on July 8th, 2003, that the central tabulator, the mothership, has 2 sets of books. Now, if you run a business and you have a double set of books, what does that mean? It means one is the real one and one is the fake one. The 16 days after publishing that study, the Avi Rubin study came out with an entirely different way to hack the system. And then the SAIC report came out, and it was so bad they said they need to redesign GEMS, and they redacted 60% of their report. And then Robert Technologies came out in January 2004, and they said they had been able to penetrate it with remote access. And then we got at the optical scan machine, and we were able to get at that through a memory card hack and through implanting a Trojan horse in the central tabulator. You'll see that before your very eyes on the HBO special. It's going to show all during the month of November. But that wasn't enough. We then had a very courageous man you'll meet tonight who said, okay, what about the TSX, the one you guys are going to be using this election? He's an elections official. He saw something wrong, he'll tell you his story. But when we came in to examine his system, I brought in 2 different security experts representing 2 different firms. They found the nuclear bomb, according to the New York Times, of voting system security problems. And then the worst problem was then found by Open Voting Consortium, and then the Princeton guys found another one. And after that, I bought a machine at a bankruptcy sale, and me and a 54-year-old woman in my office got at it with $12, took 4 minutes, and we hacked it, and we taught a chimpanzee to hack it. Now, when they tell you it's secure, bear in mind every one of the hacks I've just described use a different attack vector. There's so many ways into these things. Where do you hide a security hole if you want to put one in deliberately? You hide it in Swiss cheese. What we found in Utah were 3 different tunnels through which you could put unauthorized code in, designed such that if you found one and closed it off, you could reopen it from another one, and no, they have not been corrected in any state in the United States. But we should trust the election. So So, what the heck do we do? Well, I'm going to tell you, it's too late for November because the Diebold system that you're using here in San Diego is very much like the Ford Pinto with the exploding gas tank. There is a way to deal with this. It's called a recall. You guys spend 52 or 54 or whatever $50 million of your tax money, and they should be refunding the money. In a sane world, they would. But they're not. You're going to be using the machines on November 7th. So, one of the things that we've done after looking at this system for a long, long time is we've pretty much determined the system is rotten to the core. The certification system's rotten. Got a couple of guys, a couple of old cronies there that missed all these holes. How'd they do that? If I can spot one, how come they can't spot it? The procurement system is rotten. And the procedures that run these are inconsistently or not followed. And I have to tell you that in my opinion, you can't solve this by electing a Democrat or a Republican. Your system is rotten to the core, and the only way to fix it is by the citizens themselves, just like we had to do with Vietnam, just like we had to do with the civil rights movement in the 60s, where we had to well up and say, we are taking back our elections, we're gonna count the votes, get over it. You in the process of beginning to take back your government, which is what we are really talking about. We own the government. We, the citizens, own the government, not the other way around. We have the right to audit the government. The entire body of Freedom of Information Act law says we own the documents because our tax dollars paid for them and every bit of work that went into producing them. Right. We own our elections. That means, as owners, we have the right to see what the heck is going on. We used to have that right with hand-counted paper ballots at the precinct. We could come in and watch. It was taken away from us. No one asked us our opinion. No one asked us to vote on that. And we need to get back the right to oversee our elections, period. So, I don't think we can do that from trusting someone else to do it, because after all, they're getting elected on the same system. And our experience is they're not very likely to go back and criticize the system that put them in office. To help citizens do this, we've put together something at blackboxvoting.org. It's free. It's called the Citizens Toolkit. My opinion is if you're going to go out and take action, you should do something that comes naturally to you, that uses your natural skill set, because then you're going to keep doing it. Because guess what? This isn't a win or lose. This isn't like, okay, we won the issue, now we get to go back and watch TV. We got into this pickle because we sat there for 40 years behind watching the TV, asleep at the wheel, not paying any attention, hoping the government would get it right. We are now in a situation where we're supposed to trust the government. Communist countries say trust the government. Democracies say trust but oversee the government. And that's what we have to do. There's a lot of different modules in that toolkit. It sounds tedious, doesn't it? But this is the mechanism that our founders gave us to exercise oversight over our government. You look up the law, you find out whether they're following it or not, and if they're not, you call them on it. There's not nearly enough people in the country doing this kind of procedure, but this is love of country. There's all kinds of things you can do, but do something. Pick one thing, carry it to its completion, and you're going to see other aspects of this as I go and sit down with people who are following through from a legal standpoint, an elections official who showed tremendous love of country and followed through by putting his own job on the line for this. So, I'm not here to have you clap at me. I want to be applauding you guys after this election for pulling together and taking actions, whatever they may be, to take back your country.
You know, and if all else fails, maybe one thing we can all get together and work in concert and in unity and prevail upon our state or our country to let Jimmy Carter monitor our elections. Bruce Funk was the head of elections in a Utah county. He had used paper ballots for 20 years, but in 2006 the state forced him to use Diebold touchscreens. He had an independent exam done, and the results were written in the New York Times as, yet again, the nuclear bomb of security flaws in voting machines. Diebold lawyers descended on his location, and the next day he found himself locked out of his office. Bruce Funk.
I can't say that I'm a communicator, so let me speak to you from my heart. I've been an elected official for some 23 years, and I'm a progressive, forward-looking individual as far as technology. I was the first county in the state of Utah to implement an optically scanned ballot, while the rest of the state was primarily using the punch card. I saw that envisioned after the Florida incident, and so I fought to retain that as part of the thing. The then former Lieutenant Governor agreed that I would meet the requirements, except for the handicap on the HAVA requirement. I asked to be included as part of what was being considered on a statewide program, because it's hard work being by yourself and sole responsibility for everything that takes place there and producing your own manuals. And so that was kind of the understanding as I watched this thing progress. And you got to realize I'm talking about probably 3 years of my life trying to condense it down. And I saw Diebold get some of the finest lobbyists in the state of Utah. I saw laws going into effect that eliminated the other vendor, which I was very partial to. That was the election systems and software. I've had the optically scanned. I attended meetings, public hearings, where the public who spoke, as far as the handicap and meeting the HAVA requirement, indicated the auto mark, which from ES&S takes the optically scanned ballot in. You can't tell it from anyone else. The machine automatically marks the ovals for you. And so I tried to alert the county clerks, and I became labeled as a rebel. And so I resisted, wanting to stay what I knew was true and accurate, and I had a good paper backup trail. And the state came down and forced the county commission to go over me and to contract with the state to put in place the Diebold TXS. And therefore I had no choice. I went in with the attitude that I was going to make this work. Now, Emory County is rather small, probably 10,000 population plus. I was entitled to 40 machines, so I go through their acceptance and testing. Out of 40 machines, we reject 6, 2 of them allowed to be fixed there, and everything was fine. You know, this is a dog and pony show, if you ever saw one of this acceptance testing. One of the things they test on there is the modem, which I didn't know what it was used for. I'm new to this. And so I go back to my office. Sometime later, a Diebold person comes by, brings me candy. He's kind of fearful of me. I've scared the crap out of all of them. Trying to get the better side of me. And I tell him I've got another one up there in which the paper trail that they've now added to the machines is tracking off, and which would cause a jam. He says, oh, let me tell you, show you what to look for. And so he opens up this machine. So now I've got another one I've got to reject. And he opens this one up and he says, oh, you got to reject this one too. Here's the problem. He showed me. So now I know I've got to go back through all the remaining 38 that I have at present, because I still have 2 out, and check for this. I now find I have 8 machines of low backup storage memory, as little as 4 megabytes. The others having 26 to 29. And the thing that really struck me is, where do I turn? Because after Diebold has tied everyone up in the state of Utah with a contract, the sales representative Dana Lehto, said in our county clerk's meeting, come election day, some of you are going to hate my guts. You know, I take attention to that, paid. No one else seemed to be bothered with that, and I kind of wondered why, and I thought maybe I was just the odd duck there. And so I waited and later asked the computer technician for Diebold what it was meant by that. Well, you're going to have some problems on election day, and we'll work those out. As an election official, I don't want that kind of an answer. I want to know what's going to happen and everything. And so when I found this low memory, I knew that Diebold wasn't a source to go to. The state was new officials. They had no election experience. And I had logged in my mind who were reputable people to investigate something. And I knew that black box voting was a very reputable outfit that would bring in experts that could examine these independently. And so I approached them and asked them, and they kind of explained what they would do. And as Bev said and talked about, they brought those in. I didn't find the answer to my low memory problem until the day I was ousted. Bev recommended I talk to Ian Sancho in Leon County, Florida. I did, who had gone through a very similar thing. A very honest and upright individual. And as I met with him and over the phone, I later realized what I was getting into, and I told my wife, I said, I'm going to be known for both good and bad. And she says, probably mostly bad. But I let her read about him, Ian Sancho. And afterwards she said, I will support you. And I said, that's the first time. Wow, I'm gaining. Everything's positive from here on. And she has, and it's not been an easy thing because, as was indicated, they did lock me out of my office as an elected official. Diebold came down with their attorney, met with state officials, a representative out of the Attorney General's office, the county commissioners, and their legal counsel, and I was on the outside. And when I was brought in, I can't explain the pressure that was brought to bear on me. You know, there's nothing to explain it. There were threats in there. I was accused of $40,000 to $50,000 damage to the machines, and we'd only looked at 2, and I'd offered to buy them. But I had now the integrity of the whole elections for the whole state of Utah. And so they had, in collusion with the commissioners, come up with that amount, and that they could recertify all the machines at a cost of $40,000 to $50,000. What were they trying to do to me? And so, as I brought Bev and her crew and these 2 experts in, they are utmost integrity and honest people. And I said, one of my first questions was, what if you don't find anything? They said, that's good. And lo and behold, what they found scared me, and I had to just turn them loose. They had never actually had the machine in their hands themselves. California had recertified them based, as I understand, strictly on the software. If you want to see Christmas morning a kid with a new toy who's never had something he's wanted all of his life, you saw it. And what a tremendous group they were. Diebold has spent a tremendous amount of money discrediting black box voting, the results of the test, myself. I had to make a decision with, under Utah law, the county attorney is supposed to provide legal counsel for me. I asked for legal counsel repeatedly and was denied. I have now the state attorney general's office working against me. I still can't get anything. And there came a point I had to get legal counsel, and then there came a point I had to say to myself, I can't do all these things because now I have to find an income. I no longer have an income. And so what I did here just the other day is said, look, this is a number 10. What happens to me is a 1 or 2. Now I knew going into this that Diebold was a multi-billion-dollar company. I didn't know really how big. And I knew that that was a possibility. But I put that on the line. And as Bev indicated, you know, each of you have to put yourself on the line and step forward now. From Utah, we put the ball in motion. And as one state in this union, that we look forward to setting the pace is California. And we expect that, and we know that. And they have Utah so locked down that I can't do anything, Bev can't do anything, no one in Utah can. The county clerks there have seen things wrong, like paper jams, and would hide that from the public, everything. And I'm thinking, you are the people who should have the utmost integrity. And that's my life, is honesty and integrity, and yours should be too. And I think that if you stop and examine things, the vote is the string that weaves the very Constitution that makes this country. And I think we have to fight for that and believe in it, and I do. And I appreciate you people, and may you go out and do what needs to do. And I appreciate being here. Thank you.
A man who's paid for his principles. Lowell Finley, Esquire, has practiced election law for over 20 years. He's one of the few attorneys in the nation with experience litigating electronic voting issues, having successfully sued Diebold in a California False Claims Act case. Past cases include blocking newly elected California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger from soliciting or using special interest campaign contributions to repay an illegal $4 million personal loan. There's a lot more. Hopefully Mr. Finley will fill us in on some of his fascinating victories. Ladies and gentlemen, a great lawyer on our side, Lowell Finley.
Well, thank you very much. Even in 10 or 15 minutes, I can tell you about my victories, because there are only 2 of them at this point on voting machines. We were up against a very powerful and tenacious adversary, particularly when you put together recalcitrant officials and the vendors. But we are making headway, and what I'd first like to say is that my first case in this area and first success, the False Claims Act case against Diebold election systems, was a case in which I was representing Bev Harris, who was at that time and still the premier person to make real hard discoveries about what is wrong and what is vulnerable about these systems. I'd like to talk briefly about a case that my organization, Voter Action, brought with Cooperating Counsel in Denver, Colorado. Our model has been to recruit teams of lawyers, very highly skilled litigators in typically large law firms in the states in which we've filed lawsuits challenging use of electronic voting systems. And there we teamed with a firm called Wheeler, Trigg & Kennedy. 6 lawyers and 3 paralegals in that office threw themselves into this case over many months, donating well over $1 million worth of time, and vigorously litigated against the state of Colorado. And what they found, what they proved in court, is what, again, the activists have been saying everywhere, which is that the emperor has no clothes. That the Secretary of State in Colorado had failed to promulgate any security standards for voting systems, and it just accepted whatever the voting system manufacturers said was sufficient. The main defense that the state came in with was that you have to understand that this is all part of a system, and the Secretary of State's examination and certification of these systems is just one small part, because after all, you start with federal certification by the federal government. Well, it's never been the government in the first place. And after us, the counties check things out thoroughly, and they have security procedures on the ground with their highly trained personnel. So the certification is just one part of it. Well, one thing we were able to prove in the trial with our expert witnesses who were allowed under great secrecy to examine the reports that had been done after the federal testers, the independent testing authorities, had looked at the 4 systems we were challenging there, was that they had not done any security testing on the systems. So we know that what they purport to do is inadequate, but on the actual forms, our experts were able to see that they had checked boxes saying not examined, not applicable, that they had literally not done it, and the court made this as a formal finding as part of the case. And then on the county end of it, the court found that the state had widely variable standards at different counties all over the state, and that some of them didn't even address the topics that the Secretary of State said that they should look at in the way they administered their elections for security. And so he ordered the Secretary of State to put in place, on an emergency basis, a long list of security measures for this election, acknowledging that that was an emergency stopgap measure and that there was no way of knowing whether there was any reason to trust the security of the systems. I want to talk now about positive opportunities that, just like Bev Harris's organization, Black Box Voting, Voter Action, and several other organizations that have been working in this field are trying to put together opportunities for you and your friends, your family members who care about this, to get directly involved. And Bev talked about tools that she has on her website. One of the problems with all of us is that we're in these small nonprofit organizations and we all want to do roughly the same thing, and so you get lots and lots of tools, and maybe it's letting 1,000 flowers bloom. But Voter Action is running a program called Watch the Vote. We have a website, an 800 number that's going to go active day after tomorrow, 1-800-SAVE-VOTE, S-A-V, vote. And we're pairing with a number of national organizations, the Verified Voting Election Transparency Project, Poll Watchers for Democracy, the Election Protection Coalition, and Video the Vote. And at our website, which is voteraction.org, you can see information about this and where you can plug in, how to contact these organizations. Basically, what all of it involves is different aspects of observing in an organized fashion what is done in the run-up to the election, in early voting, in election day activities, and then in post-election audit or canvass activities, and gathering hard evidence, filling out questionnaires, videotaping things that are observed. And this has two advantages. It gives people a direct way to get involved in taking back their democracy, as Bev said, much more powerfully than I think I can. And secondly, offers us an opportunity to collect hard evidence. And I want to underscore how critical that is, because just like the work of doing the Public Records Act request, this slow building of evidence, that's the way we win cases in court. And that's one of the ways that we're going to be able to take down this system of electronic voting. Thank you very much.
Paul Lehto has become one of the foremost attorneys in the USA. Fighting electronic voting, he filed a constitutional lawsuit against touchscreens in Washington State. Lehto fought another suit here in San Diego, which uncovered an atrocity. The U.S. Congress actually installed a U.S. representative before due process was carried out in San Diego by the controlling jurisdiction. Lehto helped rural citizens in Kentucky and has recently worked with Congressman Dennis Kucinich on the new bill in Congress to force hand-counted paper ballots in the presidential race in 2008. Paul Lehto.
Thanks, everybody. A good-natured comment. I would disagree with the picture that's shown here, where that shows 1906 votes for women, and then in 2006 the women are saying, now count them. Although I think that that would be one thing they would say. I think that if we had some of the original suffragettes here who fought to get those ballots, and they realized that come November they had to do the equivalent of handing those ballots in blank and having a machine or some other person fill them out secretly where they could never see it, there would be a riot on November 7th. So the women wouldn't simply be saying, now count them. They would be saying some things in addition to that. One thing that not a lot of people know about, because I guess I don't talk about it enough, is the Snohomish scientific study that formed the basis for the lawsuit in the state of Washington. It contains some of the best smoking gun evidence of electronic voting fraud in the country, and was recently covered in the book by Steve Freeman and Joel Blias called Was the 2004 Presidential Election Stolen? And one of the smoking guns in that study, I'll get to in a moment, but first I always like to ask election officials what would they consider to be a smoking gun of electronic fraud. And you know, they don't have any ideas whatsoever. And if they're not having specific ideas for what to look for, they're not going to find it. See? Yeah. So they're not looking, they're not going to find it. So there's problem number one. And I'm going to run through a series of these problems, almost all of which present problems that are so deep and systemic and go to the nature of what electronic voting is, that electronic voting cannot be rescued. There's no way to fix it in such a way as to reform it, in my opinion. Now, there's a debate on that subject within the election reform community, and I think we can all model good democracy by having respectful debate, but I'll simply lay out my position. But first, the smoking gun. 19 machines tracked by serial number were taken out of service. These were touchscreen voting machines by Sequoia, the same monsters that Tom Corbett has in Riverside County. Those 19 machines were taken out of service because people saw them switching votes, or people saw them freeze up and just not respond to what the voters, or saw them pre-voted. You know, they'd come up to the screen and the ballot would already be filled out. And usually they'd have difficulty changing it back, but this is called touchscreen miscalibration fraud. The miscalibration fraud is an elegant way, and we actually see a way to do election fraud, and we see this with all makes and models, so that's actually surprising. You know, you'd think you'd see it more on one than the other, but you tend to see it on all, because there's both a reasonable explanation and a fraudulent explanation for why the screen is misbehaving that way. It is possible for screens, through vibration and stuff, to get messed up such that if you press in one spot, it actually lights up in a slightly different spot. The thing is, these machines do this every single time they're turned on, or a very high percentage of them do. Whereas if you see touch screens in a grocery store or something, they'll only require recalibration only infrequently. But in the 19 machines taken out of service, because they can't really deny that they were malfunctioning, in the closest gubernatorial race in the history of Washington State, and probably in the history of the country, it was less than 100 votes out of 3 million. In a Democratic county where a Democrat that was competitive had never lost in the last 2 decades, the Republicans got more than 50% more votes than the Democrats did on those malfunctioning machines. So that was way more than any precinct, any polling place, if you had to rank all the precincts in the county for a Democrat percentage versus Republican percentage, the malfunctioning machines were the best performing Republican precinct. And unlike the Maine election, where if you have some people voting on computers and some people voting on paper, they can always say that one party was disproportionately on paper and the other party was disproportionately voting by electronic, and try to use all kinds of excuses or rationalizations as to why there are differences, and sometimes those would have a little bit of validity. But the reason this is a smoking gun of the 19 machines is because you can't say that either Democrats or Republicans are disproportionately attracted to malfunctioning machines. So that's simply not going to work. But another underappreciated point is that even though sleepovers here in San Diego County is a serious issue, one concern that I have is the implication that the machines are most at risk when they're out with members of the public. I think they are at risk, But the biggest risk of election fraud is with the officials themselves. And so if we were to end sleepovers, it's certainly not going to be any kind of a reasonable system. The way that I explain this, hopefully the most clearly, is to use the example of, say, Jesse James robbing a bank. If he robs a bank, he does not get to be bank president, and he does not get to create bank vault security policy. But if you steal an election, you do get to be president, and you get to create election security for the future. Amen. So if you are looking for an election criminal, look in office. Okay? So that's why you cannot trust election officials, not to mention the fact that elections are the sole channel of power transfer from the people to the government, the only legitimate channel for power transfer, and it's also tax money, right, or authority to tax. So all their money and all their power is coming from the elections, and now they want to count the votes in secret. And there's no getting around. They don't even have a counter argument to that. They are counting the votes in secret, and you can't even get information about it after the fact. In fact, most election officials will say they don't even know. It's all the vendor. Okay. So sarcastically, I mean, maybe we ought to auction off the right to secret vote counting, because you could probably get a lot of money for it. But the bottom line is that if your political enemy is counting the votes in secret, that's a picture really of what the founders called tyranny. But if your political friend is counting votes in secret, that is a picture of corruption. So no matter what, secret vote counting is fatal to the legitimacy of the election system, and there's not a damn thing anybody can do about it between now and November 7th. So the election is going to be legitimate. I think we'll all probably, hope that our candidates win, and if they do, we probably won't say anything. But we've been put in a horrible position. The elections, I think, at this point are illegitimate. The problem is, and looking to the future, is that it may happen now or it may happen in 2008, but at some point, because I believe that we've won this debate, it's overkill, 10 times over, 100 times over, thanks to everybody here and on the panel and everything else. That the problem is that when you look at the HABA deadlines, you've got new standards coming in 2007, and everybody seems to say there's no way these machines can meet these standards. So you're going to have uncertifiable machines, you're going to have hackable machines, you're going to have secret vote counting. Do you think these elections are valid? And what happens to the incumbent party if you don't have valid elections? Well, the only way you can get rid of people who are in power is through valid elections. So they have an option. They can either win the election, but if they don't win the election, they have an optional middle one, which is cheat. They don't have to do that. But the third option is invalidate the election. Say, you know what? We just discovered this is a joke. And sure enough, in the last week, we have the chair of the EAC, Mr. DeForest Soares, going on TV saying he was lied to, he thinks this is all fraud, there's no security, no standards. So everything that I see is in place for that to happen either this election or next election. So there's a lot of amazing things going on, and I haven't even talked about, and I won't be allowed to talk about, the Military Commissions Act of 2006. There's no basis for confidence in these elections. There's no way for reporters, and many will be asked in November, how do you confirm what the results are? You're supposed to have independent confirmation. Isn't that the way journalists work? They have no way to do that. The numbers have to be taken totally based on faith. So for this and many other reasons, as I started out by saying, there's no way that this system of voting can be rescued from oblivion. The only question is, how long is it going to take for the public to find out enough and start the process of fixing it? Are we going to wait till the 2008 presidential election, or is it going to happen sooner than that? I wish that more election officials were like Bruce Funk. The real elections officials, which are rare, and the real citizens, which are somewhat more common, are what I call sentinels of democracy. If you are a sentinel or a defender of democracy, there's a lot of talk about defending democracy, but let's use that metaphor. What would somebody do who's actually defending democracy? Well, for one thing, if there was a potential threat to elections, they would investigate it. Elections officials do not do that. They rationalize it. If there's any plausible reason not to do something, they'll seize upon that reason. So they're not being sentinels of democracy. A sentinel Is it like a watchman will get up in the middle of the night and investigate the noise even if they think it might be the cat? Because they don't know that it's the cat, and they want to defend their family or their house or whatever. Elections officials are not sentinels of democracy. They serve, as I said in the closing brief, that the elections officials, including specifically Michael Haas, serve their Constitution poorly, serve our elections poorly, and therefore they serve their country poorly by not taking elections seriously and by not respecting we the people. We the people intended nothing like that. We the people intended that the people are in charge and the people are to be respected, and that is not what we have here. Thank you.
Patty Newton, a San Diego poll worker, and also a renowned, now, whistleblower. Patty Newton, where are you?
I originally decided to be a poll worker because I was very distrustful of the system, and I'm more distrustful and more scared than I was when I really didn't know what was going on. And I am very frightened by what I read. In my hand here is an October 3rd directive from the Secretary of State, Bruce McPherson, trying to assuage all our fears about paper ballots and assuring us that they will be available on Election Day, not to worry. There will be plenty on hand, and if they aren't, you can wait, and somebody will run down to the ROV in San Diego and maybe make it back up to Valley Center where you're voting in time for you to vote. That's no comfort at all. And further, in the language of this letter, it states that the paper ballots that will be provided if you demand a paper ballot will be at the number or availability will be at the discretion of the Registrar of Voters. The Registrar of Voters is Michael Haas. We all know about Michael Haas. So that gives me no comfort at all. And as a practical matter, paper ballots are going to be treated the way absentee ballots are and the way provisional ballots are. And I'm not certain, I haven't seen it, but I think they're round file ballots. I think that's what actually occurs. And it's not a very comforting fact. They're not counted quickly. And so when you're sitting listening to election results, they're not accurate. They're not proven. And then, as we saw last time, Brian Bilbrey ran to Washington, D.C. to get sworn in as quickly as he possibly could to alleviate any fear of lawsuits. So there are all kinds of ways to defeat voters at the polls. And what I'm here to do today is to encourage you to do the things that you can do, and that is to call the Registrar of Voters, register your disgust, and demand an adequate supply of paper ballots at your precinct. And an adequate supply, in my mind, is one paper ballot for every registered voter in that precinct. Thank you. Call every day, encourage your friends and family to do that. Write letters to the editor, write editorials, do whatever you can, phone trees. It sounds simple and you think, it's not going to make a difference, but it really, truly does. So what I want to do is encourage you not to give up, to keep moving forward. There are people here that will inspire you tonight that work hard, give up great chunks of their lives to ensure that our democracy isn't stolen again, and that if it is, we aren't going to go down without a fight. Please be aware of what the reality of paper ballots is. It's not the comfort, it's not the magic bullet that McPherson and Haas want you to believe that it is, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't be voting on paper or voting early or voting absentee. But don't trust the touch screens. As a poll worker, I'm going to tell everybody who comes into my precinct, don't use the touch screens. And if you insist, look at the paper window before you cast your ballot. Make sure that what's printed on that paper is what you wanted to cast. there's all kinds of ways to defeat us, and if we're knowledgeable, if we're watchful, they're not going to be able to do it again. So thank you for your attention and your interest in this issue.
Riverside County initiated a project called Save Our Vote. We had 65 people in June monitoring the elections. We're going to have 200 people monitoring the elections in November. Here's the easiest thing you can do if they post the results at the precincts. We fought for years to force them to post the results at the precincts, and we succeeded, effective this coming November. We're initiating a program called RTR, Record the Results. What we're doing is we're getting teams of 2 people to ride around in a car, and they're going to go to 15 precincts in a geographical circle, and they're going to record at between 8:30 and 10:30 at night. They're going to record the results of the top candidates, governor, lieutenant governor, etc., about 6 candidates and 2 propositions. And they're going to take digital photos of them. We are then going to put them in a spreadsheet. We're going to cover the entire county. We have 605 precincts. We're going to attempt to hit every single precinct. We're going to record the result. And then hours later or days later, when the registrar reports out from the central tabulator what the precinct results are, we'll do a comparison, hand it to the registrar and say, here you go. Go ahead and reconcile, because we doubt that they're going to match. That's what you can do as a simple project, and that's what we're doing in Riverside.
So where do we go from here? Well, first of all, I think we have to say that I think private companies, they don't do a very good job of counting our votes, especially companies that give lots of money, mainly to the Republican Party, although to the Democratic Party too. We obviously have to have transparency in our system. Well, what's one thing that we can do right away to sort of fix this problem? Well, what do they do in the rest of the world? Well, you know, in the rest of the world, if you want to get your election certified, you have to use one system, this is radical, one system of voting throughout the whole country. I mean, in fact, so we send international observers other places, and yet we couldn't even pass our own certification process. That is ridiculous. Now, what can we do under that system? First of all, we want to make sure that we have uniform standards for voting. Everyone, again, uses the same process. We have uniform rules for voting. Everyone follows the same rules. The testing for all our machines is the same throughout the state. And finally, we make sure that the machines that we use are not owned by, they can be produced by some private corporation, but they are publicly owned machines, and the code that runs those machines is publicly owned and written by state officials and is open to anybody for observation. Under a uniform voting system, we have to make sure that everyone has an equal opportunity to vote. We have to make sure that there's enough polling places in every community so people are not standing in long lines. We have to make sure that we have trained and professionalized poll workers so we can get people through the lines fast and they know what's going on. These are all very important for the integrity of the vote. And then finally, we may have, as far as I'm concerned, we also have to move to making sure that everybody is registered to vote. And the way we can do that, again, with a uniform system, is to allow people to register at the polls on election day. They do it in 6 states, and when they do it, turnout is 10 to 15% higher. The bottom line is this: if we really want a democracy in this country, if we really want people to participate, let's not make it hard for them to vote. Let's make them have confidence in the system. Let's make it easy for them to come down to the polls. A lot of people don't even pay attention to the election until, let's say, about now. But if you just start paying attention now and you're not registered, too bad, you're not voting. Well, that's ridiculous. Most countries either have everybody can vote, or at least they allow everyone to register at the polls. And we should do the same thing here. So let's make this a real democracy. Let's get our machines back in order. And I thank you for your time. All right, let's hear it.
What do you believe is the solution to our crisis in confidence? Should we even bother to vote?
They don't even need to steal the election if you don't vote.
It's more important, given these uncertainties, for everyone to vote and to get out everybody they know, particularly people who think the way they do about politics, to vote. Because if you want to make it more difficult to tamper with things and to steal elections, then you put on an overwhelming show of force. On a deeper level, I think that people need to be approaching this as an issue of staying on the offensive rather than retreating, and so continuing to participate, continuing to demand change, protesting at the polls if things are not right, contacting the local elections officials, doing everything possible to keep this process moving in a positive direction is what's going to win the day eventually.
I disagree with this whole idea of we need to build confidence. No, each election should be proven to have been legitimately run, and then the public can be confident in the result.
We've got to get out of the business of private companies running our elections. That is number one.
Everybody should vote, even because it's our elections, even though it's not going to be valid. I'm still searching for the right metaphor, but if since I have a 5-year-old and a 7-year-old, if you remember the Grinch that stole Christmas, when he takes all the toys, they still get around the invisible tree and sing their songs because it's their holiday.
We know that margins for error are valid, and that results have fallen within the error range for every presidential election for the past 50 years prior to 2004. Never have exit polls varied by beyond error margins in a single state, not since 1948 when this kind of polling began, but in 2004 it happened in 10 states. All of them swing states, all of them in the favor of one candidate. Coincidence? Of course not. Karl Rove isn't capable of conceiving and executing such a grandiose crime? Wake up. They did it. The silence of traditional media on this subject is enough to establish their newfound bankruptcy. The revolution will have to begin here. I challenge every other thinker at the Huffington Post. Is there any greater imperative than to reverse this crime and reestablish democracy in America? Why the mass silence? Let's go to work with the circumstantial evidence, begin to narrow from the outside in, find some witnesses who will turn. That's how they cracked Watergate. This is bigger. And I never dreamed I'd say that in my baby boomer lifetime.
We are taking back our elections. We're gonna count the votes. Get over it.